Good morning, everyone. It is another episode of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. It is May 22nd, 2024. And this week we're talking about where can I fly as a basic drone pilot. My name's Ian. I've got Jen with me and Finn. We're Canada's drone experts, and we're going to be talking about the requirements for flying under basic operations today.
By the end of today's episode, you'll know where you can fly as a basic pilot, what regulations are applicable to basic pilots, and how you can get a basic certificate if you do not already hold a basic certificate. And then we'll open it up to questions at the end.
And this is going to apply to any drones that weigh 250 grams or more in Canada.
Exactly. So if your drone weighs more than 250 grams, you need either a basic or advanced. So this is just operations related to basic operations. So if you want to figure out if you're in a basic environment, we call it a basic environment if it's a basic flight, you can ask yourself 4 questions. Question number 1, is the drone within 30 meters of a bystander, 30 meters or 100 feet of a bystander? Broadly speaking, a bystander is just defined as anyone not involved in the operation. So if you're flying with your friend and you tell your friend about the operation, it's that person is not a bystander. They can stand next to you. But if there's someone walking their dog, that person would be a bystander. Is the drone less than 1 nautical mile from a certified heliport? Is the drone less than 3 nautical miles from a certified aerodrome? Am I in controlled airspace? If the answer to any of these is yes, you are not in the basic environment. Now, if you're new to drones, 1 nautical mile from a certified heliport, 3 nautical miles from a certified aerodrome, controlled airspace. These might be new terms or something that you don't know how to check. In order to check these, you would go to map.navdrone.ca. So Ian's going to pull up Navdrone and he's going to show you what it looks like.
There's no login required. There's no registration or anything. So as a basic pilot, you may or may not want to register. You don't have to register. It's possible to use it as a basic pilot, but it's meant more to be used as an advanced pilot. But anyway, so you go to map.navdrone.ca, you'll log in and you will load the website, and this is what you will see is a map with a bunch of circles, and it should be geo-referenced, so it should roughly come to where you are in Canada. But if not, on the bottom right, you've got a target button. You click that, it's going to go to your location. So we're in Surrey at Coastal Drone headquarters, and we can zoom back out and see if there is no shading or no color or anything like that in the current mode that it's in, which is by default basic pilot. If it's white, then there is no controlled airspace over top of us that would affect us at 0 to 400 feet. And there's no airports or aerodromes at this point where this pin is. This big dark red circle to the bottom right, that is controlled airspace. That is an advanced environment. And then this orange and red and everything overlaid circle over here is also controlled airspace. This small red circle here, this is a heliport. That's a certified helipad at a hospital.
That's Surrey Memorial Hospital. And then the one across the river there, that's Royal Columbian Hospital. So if you live near a hospital, please check to see if that hospital has a heliport.
And a heliport is a 1 nautical mile radius that you must stay away from as a basic pilot. And the bigger red circles are the 3 nautical mile or bigger radius around a certified aerodrome or an airport.
Exactly. To keep it very simple, if you bring up map.navdrone.ca and put it to the basic filter, if it is in red, you cannot fly there. If it's in the orangey yellow, that's a place where you need to exercise caution. And you might want to potentially reconsider flying in that area, but it is not impermissible to fly in that area. Red is no-go.
This is Fort Langley. Fort Langley calls itself an airport, but it's not. It's an aerodrome. So it's an uncertified aerodrome. And you'll notice it's got the orange hot dog, which is the area immediately surrounding the runway, which, again, like Finn says, you need to exercise caution. Is it a good idea to fly there? Absolutely not, especially if this is your first time flying. It's a very busy area for traffic. And then immediately to the right, you've got this yellow block. And as you go through the basic certification, you'll understand that there's Class F airspace, which is either advisory, danger, or restricted. This yellow block is advisory airspace, and you'll see it by clicking on it, and it goes to Glen Valley, CYA 188, and then it says in brackets AT. The A is aerobatics, and the T stands for training. We call this Glen Valley International. It is the most stressful place to fly through in a manned aircraft because it is insanely busy for training. I'll often find myself flying low level along the river doing fishery stuff. And it's crazy busy on the radio in that area because people are doing practice circuits and pattern
You
work.
can basically have aircraft between 20 and 4,500 feet, any altitude.
Yeah. So they're everywhere and anywhere. You can fly here as a basic pilot. You can fly a drone in this area without airspace permission or anything else. But again, is it a good idea? Probably not. There's some spots in there that are actually pretty good fly spots, but you have to have your head on a swivel the entire time.
There could be a fixed wing aircraft doing a simulated engine failure. And if they're with a good instructor, that instructor could take the aircraft down to 25 feet, in which case that's probably at the same altitude that you're flying. No matter what, the aircraft has the right of way. If you read the regulations, it says that if there's any conflict, you need to terminate the flight immediately.
So yeah, this yellow area, you can fly as a basic pilot. This red area over here, this is not a heliport. This is Class F restricted airspace. It's surrounding a prison. It's mission institution, and it's from the ground to 1,500 feet is restricted. You can fly as a basic pilot at this property if you have permission from the warden. There is no overlapping controlled airspace. It's still Class G airspace around it. Case in point, there's a bunch of houses in the area. Maybe you're doing real estate as a basic pilot. You would just need to inform the warden on this day at this time, I would like to fly at this property. This is my plan. And you would email them, and then they would give you written permission for that time and that, so that you're not violating the CYR, which is an Aeronautics Act. So it's more than just it's a criminal offense.
If it's in red, it's a no-go. If it's in yellow, exercise caution. There's some other particularities about where you can take off and land, but broadly speaking, from an airspace perspective, map.nav drone is the place to go. So then you determine, okay, I am in a basic environment. So what are the rules of operation in a basic environment? There's broadly kind of three things that you'll need to do if you want to operate in a basic environment. First things first, of course, is get your pilot certificate. In order to fly, as we mentioned before, if the drone weighs 250 grams or more, you need, at minimum, a basic certificate to fly that aircraft. For some, depending on where you live, you might need an advanced as well. But to fly anything over 250 grams, you need, at minimum, a basic certificate. We'll talk about in a minute how to actually obtain the basic certificate. The other thing you'll need to do is register your aircraft. So any aircraft over 250 grams also needs to be registered with Transport Canada. And you do that via the Drone Management Portal. Now, I've got some screenshots of the Drone Management Portal. It's pretty simple to find. You just Google Drone Management Portal, and it will be the first result. So you just will click sign in. So there you can see the sign ins there. And then once you sign in, you can either sign in with your GC key, which is if you've ever logged in to file your taxes, that would be your GC key, or you can log in through your bank with your banking info. Depending on your bank, my bank is not listed. Not every bank is listed. So I use the GC key, and then just the home page of the Drone Management Portal, and you see there's a number of options here. On the left is register a drone. You might see something in the middle there that we're going to circle back on in a minute, but the important one for right now is register your drone. Registering your drone takes about 10 minutes. The only thing you're going to need is your drone's serial number. If it's a DJI drone, normally that's written on the inside of the battery compartment. It's beside the QR code. And if you can't find the serial number, just Google DJI, whatever your drone is, serial number location, and DJI have a page for each drone about where to find the serial number. Then once you've completed registering the drone, it's $5 to register the drone?
Yeah, $5 for the registration, $10 for the test.
Yeah, $5 for the registration. You just need to take that registration number. We call it the C number because everything starts with a C, and you need to write that on your drone somewhere. You could use a label maker. You could use a piece of masking tape. You could etch it in with a blade. You could write it on with a Sharpie. As long as it's visible, it doesn't matter exactly how you write it down.
It needs to be durable to some extent. Not you don't need to etch it, and you may not want to etch it because then if you go to sell the drone, now it's permanent.
Yeah, it keeps the same C number if you sell it, but I could see why someone would potentially not want to take a hobby knife to their $1,200 new aircraft.
Warranty void.
Our recommendation normally is to either use a piece of good masking tape or a label maker. Those generally have the best results. All right. And then the third thing that you need to do as a basic pilot is make checklists and perform a site survey before every flight. This is to be compliant with the regulations. Drone checklists do not need to be 400 pages long. In fact, my quick reference guide for my drone is one single page. We've done a whole video about what the minimum checklist requirements are. You just need a pre-flight check, takeoff check, launch, approach, landing, and recovery procedure. For each one of these procedures, it doesn't need to be very long. 3 to 4 bullet points of things to consider, safety considerations to consider. Again, the checklist should fit the aircraft that you're flying. And then for the emergencies, your emergency checklist, there are 6 emergencies that need to appear in your emergency checklist. They are control station failures, equipment failures, RPAS failures, loss of command and control link, so the controller and the drone stop talking to each other, a flyaway, which is then the drone, they're not talking to each other and the drone is flying away from you, and then a flight termination, which is it's a bit of a crash landing or an emergency landing. All of these have like legal definitions. We've delved into these topics a little bit more in other videos, so I would recommend if you're curious about how to build out your checklist to take a look at those, and we go into kind of the legal definitions of these checklists. But this is the minimum that needs to be in your checklist to be to be compliant with the regulations. And then you need to perform a site survey. Before every flight, you need to perform a site survey. It doesn't need to be done on paper. It can be done verbally with a checklist. And you just need to figure out these things. So the boundaries of the area of operation, very simple. I'm going to fly over this field. Done. Class of airspace. So ideally for a basic pilot, you want to figure out the class of airspace before you go flying, because you want to make sure that you're in Class G uncontrolled airspace.
So before you go anywhere, you should basically open up the app.
Exactly. Because you don't want to show up somewhere and then be like, I can't fly here.
Just drove 45 minutes to get here or something.
Altitudes and routes. So how high am I going to fly? Where am I going to fly? Proximity of manned aircraft operations and aerodromes and airports. Again, this is something that when you're looking at the map beforehand, you can determine beforehand where manned aircraft are likely to be and where aerodromes, heliports, airports are around you. And of course, if you're too close to them, then you can't fly there anyways. Location and height of obstacles. This is something you can do on site. There's a tree over there. Looks to be about 70 feet tall, something like that. Other things to look out for: telephone poles with wires, cell towers, wind turbines, something like this that could potentially affect your flight. Weather. You want to check the weather. Your drone's manual will have limitations on the weather, maximum wind speed, temperature range, things like that. You want to make sure you're within those limits. And then the horizontal distance from persons not involved in the operation. By definition, as a basic pilot, this is 30 meters, 100 feet. Then the question is, how do I get a basic certificate? Getting a basic certificate, fairly straightforward. We kind of have broken it down into three easy steps. Step 1, study for the basic exam. You can either do that, you can self-study, or Coastal Drone, we have our basic pilot bundle, which will get you prepared for the basic online test. Step 2, you write the basic exam on the Transport Canada website through the drone management portal that we showed earlier. So you just click take an exam, you select basic. It's $10 for the exam. If you're unsuccessful the first time, you just need to wait 24 hours. There's no limit to the amount of retakes. So if you fail it 2-3 times, that's okay. Just continue to study hard, review your notes, come back the next day and take the exam. And then step 3, build out your checklists, do your site survey, and fly in a safe and legal manner.
Yeah, and in terms of resources that are available out there, like there's plenty of paid and free resources to get ready for the basic and even the advanced. Like there's no hard and fast requirement to take any kind of study course. The reason the courses are out there is that there's a lot of knowledge that kind of leverages on traditional aviation knowledge in these courses. You look at the knowledge requirement guide that Transport lays out, it's called TP 15263. And for the basic, it's roughly the equivalent of a recreational pilot certificate for airplanes. So knowledge of weather, knowledge of human factors, knowledge of air law, airspace, navigation theory. Like there's stuff in there that's not necessarily specific to drones.
Yeah, you'll need to know how to read a map. You'll need to know how to read a aviation weather report.
The reality of it is if you're flying a drone, you're sharing the same airspace as a manned aircraft is. So you need to understand what to expect from that airplane. It's on you to get out of their way. And the only way to safely assume and understand what an aircraft might be doing is to have an idea what a circuit looks like, where the downwind leg is, if you're near an aerodrome or an airport, what way are they going to be going most likely? That's going to come from your general aviation knowledge, which is tested as both the basic and more so on the advanced level.
CAR's definition of an aircrew is anybody involved in the operation of an airplane or helicopter, or anyone in the operation of an RPAS flight. The CARs treat you like a pilot of a airplane. They treat you like a pilot of a helicopter. So
Same responsibilities.
it's the same responsibilities. It's the same level, or it's not quite the same level of knowledge. You have to take flying the drone, even in a basic environment, seriously. When you take your Air Canada flight to Toronto, that pilot is taking his job their job seriously, and Transport Canada wants you to take your drone job seriously as well.
All right. So once you've got your basic certificate and you've got your checklist and your SOPs and your site survey kind of checklist sorted out, and so what the Coastal package does is we go through all the ground school. The basic pilot certificate course is about 3 hours of online video and content to get you to the point where you have a level of comfort and understanding of what the test is going to look like. And then we also have sample test questions. And the sample test questions are formulated to be like the basic online exam. Key thing to remember with the basic and the advanced online exam is they are open book exercises. You're allowed to use written resources to help you go through the test. You are not allowed to have someone help you do the questions in real time.
Yeah, if you're taking the exam, don't call me.
Keep in mind it is timed as well. So you do want to study. You don't want to just be like Googling answers really quick because it will take time.
The difficulty and the timing allowed is enough that if you went in completely cold with zero aviation knowledge, you would not pass. Yeah. Right?
You need to study.
You would spend all your time Googling. Like the advanced, I think it's less than a minute a question or roughly a minute a question.
It's 60 minutes for 50 questions. So it's like a minute and 10 seconds per question.
And it's an 80% passing grade for the advanced and it's a 60% passing grade for the basic. Less questions, a little bit more time to work through. So, and I'm a big fan of passing or failing first. Right. When it comes to tests like this, like there is no real negative consequence to failing this test. If you want to go out and try it and get an idea what it's like, if you are looking at this from YouTube and haven't bought a course or don't intend to, and you're just going at it like 10 minutes at a time on YouTube, right? Realistically, there's nothing wrong with taking the test and trying and seeing where you're at. If you have a level of comfort with aviation already, like I said, there's no requirement. You don't have to take our test or our course. The point is, we're trying to consolidate everything into one course package so that we save you some time in the long run.
Some FAQs that we get. Once we get certified, is this good for life on the basic certificate?
No, so let's talk about that. You will need every 24 months to get your recency done. There's a few ways to do that to stay current with your license or with your certificate. You could take the test again. If you wanted to go back on Transport Canada, you can take the $10 test again. The nice thing about taking the test again is it actually lists all the times you've taken the test. So you can really quickly go and reference that to see when the last time you took it and make sure that you're still valid and good to go. You could take one of our recency seminars. So that's also available from us on Coastal Drone. You could do a self-paced recency.
Yeah, the transport one.
Yeah, the Transport Canada one. And then you could also, let's say, a year and a half down the line, you decide you want to do your advanced license. That would also keep you current because now you're going in, you're getting a new certificate. So you could jump into a new lane with that as well. So there's lots of ways to stay current.
Yeah, and it's key to point out. So if you do the basic test, you have a basic certificate once you pass. If you do the advanced online test, you have a basic certificate until you do the flight review. So there's nothing wrong with doing one or the other. The reality of it is, when you have a basic certificate, this is what applies to you, and this is what's going to be available for you to do. Can I make money with a basic pilot certificate?
Yeah, you can. In Canada, we'll make that distinction. Ian's mentioned a few times there's different regulations in the United States, so keep that in mind if you are an American pilot watching this. Don't just assume that you can just run out today and do that. But as a Canadian in Canada, you can fly your basic certificate and make money.
In helicopters and airplanes, we've got different types of licenses, and one of them is the commercial license, and you need to hold a commercial license to collect money. No, there is no such distinction for drone pilots. As long as you are flying legally, you are allowed to collect money.
And that's the same across the entire spectrum of drone piloting right now. So from micro to basic to advanced to heavyweight SFOC stuff, even as a foreign pilot, there's still, well, on the foreign pilot SFOC, they are starting to ask if you're doing this for commercial activity or for leisure. only because they're trying to track like the economic activity that's coming in. But there's no difference in rules. Do you need a basic pilot certificate to fly indoors?
There is no CARS regulation for flying indoors. So you can fly indoors without a basic pilot certificate.
So you're totally exempt.
Yeah. Obviously, you want to keep in mind that now you're in close quarters and there's a lot of other things. I think we've discussed that a few times as well, but there's obstacles and things that you might want to be cautious of if you're taking your drone inside, especially if it's over 250 grams. You're playing with fire.
Indoors, you probably want more than basic flying skills, realistically, because you've got a lot of factors. There's vision system isn't necessarily going to work as well for holding the drone, but it's going to be relying on the vision system more because you will not likely have a GPS signal. So the drone may tend to drift. And then if it's a dark room that you're trying to fly into, it's going to be even worse. Prop guards definitely are going to be a good thing to have. They're actually meant for flying indoors. They're not meant for flying outdoors because they actually limit the performance of the drone. The compass may not work. The direction hold may not work. So, and then, you're dealing with lots of potential hazards of hitting things.
Use caution, but there are no cars inside.
The definition of indoors, at least 3/4 of enclosure, right? So if it was like a garage with the door open, it's still technically indoors, like a roof, and then at least 3 walls is what's considered indoors. If you're inside a hangar structure or something like that, like you can fly a drone indoors in controlled airspace at an airport. You will probably run into DJI unlock issues. So a couple of weeks back, we talked about unlocks. It'd be good to go back and look at that episode because there is even still indoors, like in a hangar, there's a good chance you're going to get a GPS lock. We use Sky Helicopters all the time to do indoor flying, and it's in controlled airspace. It's in a blue zone, so it requires an unlock for the drone. And it does get GPS signal inside the hangar because the ceiling is thin enough that the GPS picks it up. Do you need a basic pilot certificate to fly on your own property?
Yes.
If the drone weighs 250 grams?
Yeah.
So just because it's your property, it's still Transport Canada regulations still apply, especially if you live near an airport or near a heliport or in controlled airspace. As soon as the drone leaves the ground, it is now flying and it is in that Canadian domestic airspace. The domestic airspace starts as soon as it is not touching the ground. So if you want to fly a drone and you live in Richmond, BC, and you're in the Class C control zone for Vancouver International, you would need an advanced pilot certificate to fly a drone there. So if you live anywhere else, the basic rules apply. The only time that you don't need a license or a pilot certificate to fly is if you're indoors.
So even if you live out in the bush with no one around, for miles and miles and miles, you still need the basic certificate. Doesn't matter if there's no one around. It doesn't matter if there's no airspace around, no aircraft around. Once a drone that weighs over 250 grams is in flight, you need a basic or advanced certificate.
Veronica has a great question here. She just wants to clear up something. Is a visual observer only required for advanced flight certified conditions?
A visual observer is never strictly required. What is required is that the drone remains within line of sight. So if basic or advanced, if you're in a situation where you as the person at the controls cannot guarantee that you can keep eyes on the drone for the duration of the flight, you need a visual observer. This could be either you're looking at your controller for a prolonged period of time to line up a shot or to monitor something on your screen, or if you're flying around something where you might not be able to see through it, or you're flying down a long road corridor or something, and eventually you won't be able to keep eyes on the drone. That's when you need a visual observer. Or
if you're wearing first-person view goggles.
Or if you're wearing FPV goggles. So it's not about basic or advanced. It's about line of sight.
And line of sight is being able to see the area, identify the direction and heading and speed and altitude of the drone, but more importantly, seeing if there's any potential manned aircraft in the area and being able to avoid
or other obstacles, not just manned aircraft. It can be something that people will often get into trouble with are trees, because a protruding branch, especially if it's on a background of other trees, you might not be able to see it. And the other one is power lines, because they're very small.
And it's very easy to fly sideways into a hazard and not recognize it.
Yeah, that's why part of the flight review is being able to judge and recognize distances. It's because depth perception for drone pilots really matters because you're standing in one spot and the drone is moving in a three-dimensional plane.
We should clear up also like the other main requirements for general basic operations that apply to all drones, basic or advanced. So the maximum altitude for drone flying in Canada is 400 feet above ground or 120 meters in Class G uncontrolled airspace, except if you are within 200 feet of a structure. So if you're within 200 feet horizontally of a structure, you can then climb up to 100 feet above that structure as long as you remain in Class G uncontrolled airspace as a basic pilot. So a good example of that might be where you shouldn't do it, Sumas Mountain in Chilliwack. It's actually the top of the mountain is getting close to Class E controlled airspace, which you would not be allowed to fly in as a basic pilot. But if you got contracted to go and do a tower survey, the tower is like, let's say it's 1,000 feet tall. And let's say the Class E started at 500 feet above the top of the mountain. If you were to climb up to that 1,000-foot top, you would actually be entering controlled airspace, which you would not be allowed to do as a basic pilot. Daryl's got a question here. Is it best practice to avoid flying near critical infrastructure? Where is this defined in the AIM or CARS? It is a good idea to not fly near critical because if you're especially a new pilot, the risk and hazard of flying a drone into a transfer station and causing a major blackout or distracting someone that's doing a critical task, it's kind of the same as flying near railway. There's no cars that say you can't fly near trains, for example, but railway is very particular about drones flying near them because it's a safety sensitive task and it could be potentially distracting. And then you do have the 30-meter limit. You do have flying over people limits. Now they're in a train, so they're technically in a moving vehicle, so that kind of goes out the window, but it's not a good idea.
I have been asked this in the past if there is a definition of critical infrastructure in the CARS or AIM. There is no definition. So that's up to your discretion as the pilot, whether or not you feel comfortable flying in a certain area.
Yeah. So if you got asked to fly a hydro station as your first job, probably not the best.
Yeah. And if it is a hydro station, then there will definitely be a bystander within 30 meters of the operation.
Down that thread, like there's RF interference, there's electromagnetic interference. Like it's a very high risk environment for a drone to fly, and not to mention the risk of arcing. And everything.
Most municipalities in Canada have bylaws that prevent you from taking off or landing or operating inside city parks or something like this. You also can't take off and land from private property without the permission of the landowner. NAV Canada, they are the people who have been granted jurisdiction over Canadian airspace. So they are the ones that grant airspace permissions, yes or no. There is a little bit of a gray area whether or not you could potentially take off outside of a city park and then fly into the park. We recommend that you don't do that, especially as a basic pilot. If there's anybody in the park, likely they're within 100 feet. But the other thing is that NAV Canada, they always recommend that if there is a bylaw, even if that bylaw technically, legally, they don't have the jurisdiction to write that bylaw, they always say, don't worry or don't mess with it. Respect that bylaw because it's not worth the fight. It's never really worth a fight to do this. And same thing with people's private property. You can request for airspace permission over someone's private property. Let's say you're doing a real estate shoot and it's in a place with multiple properties. You could and you needed to fly over someone's property to get a shot of the property that you're looking at. This is allowed under the regulations because you've got airspace permission from NAV Canada. People don't actually own the airspace over their own private property. As a best practice, it is always a best practice to not be a nuisance. Don't hover over someone's private property for prolonged periods of time and be a nuisance. And that being said, you also have, especially if you're working in a commercial capacity, there are commercial guidelines that you need to follow. These guidelines are called PIPEDA. We've done a video about PIPEDA.
Privacy. Yeah. A few weeks ago, I checked that one out too.
Mm-hmm. Be aware of where you're taking off and landing from and try to not be a nuisance when you're flying.
Yeah, you could always go and talk to people too. Let them know you're there, obviously. Knock on some doors and then avoid that problem altogether, hopefully.
Be conspicuous, right? We talked about like the best approach is to be fully prepared and be as visible as possible. And
yep, a high vis gets you a lot of credibility.
Mustafa has a question. Do we need to keep a record of checklists for basic pilots? And I think you mean your site survey and also flight logs. You do need to keep track or record of your flight time and flight records. If you fly a DJI product, as long as you're logged in to the drone, that would satisfy the requirement for record keeping.
We recommend that you keep your own personal record just in a spreadsheet. Date, where you flew, takeoff time, landing time. Done.
Essentially it. And then maintenance records.
Yeah. So then in terms of keeping records of checklists and site surveys, so what the cars say is you need to have established procedures. I read that as they need to at least be written down enough that someone else could go and read them.
Yes. That's the whole point.
Not in your head. Yeah. They need to just, so it doesn't need to be on paper. You could make a PDF and keep it on your iPad and just be holding your iPad.
Yeah.
But when it says established, to me, that reads as someone else needs to be able to look at it.
Whole point of checklists and procedures is to train someone. It's a useful tool for you to remind yourself of the next step in your process if you get interrupted. But as you become more and more competent and fly regularly, you're less and less likely to rely on checklists, but you have to have that tool in place that if you get distracted or think you might have skipped a step, you have a check and balance to rely on to go back to. The first and the ultimate goal, though, of a checklist is this is the established procedure for how to start the drone, how to take off, how to fly it, what to do in the event of emergency, so that if you have a visual observer with you, here's my checklist. I've got to fly away. I got to deal with it. What's the step that I need to do next, right? Or can you call for me this number and here's what they need to know? So having that stuff laid out is great.
As for a record of site surveys, not a regulatory requirement, not a bad idea to have a record. In the biz, we call it getting ramped. If anyone comes and or if someone from a regulatory agency comes and tries to see your checklists, it is much easier, or let's say that you get into some sort of incident or accident, it is much easier to prove that you were not breaking the law if you are able to provide the site survey that you completed.
Yeah, your risk assessment. Yeah. And that's the whole point is how do you know you're in a basic environment if you didn't do a site survey? It's the same thing I said a few weeks ago about micros. How do you know that you're not in restricted airspace with a micro drone if you don't do a site survey, even though there's no requirement for a site survey?
You need to look at official sources. You have to say that it's an official source. So currently the two official sources for drone pilots are the NRC site selection tool
And NavDrone.
and map.navdrone.ca. Quickest, easiest way, map.navdrone.ca. It's free. You don't need to log in. You just look and you're done.
So as a basic pilot, you can fly up to 25 kilograms with a drone. So if you are flying a custom drone, and this is one key thing to remember with a basic pilot, you can build your own drone. So any RC airplane, that's considered a basic aircraft if it doesn't have a safety assurance declaration. So a lot of MAC members now are also getting their basic pilot certificates because it's required at some fields. Those fall under that category typically. 25 kilograms is quite a bit of weight. RC helicopters, same thing. You would need at least a basic pilot certificate to fly it. And if you start building something completely custom, so like an FPV, you can fly that. You would register the drone as a custom built, go through the process of developing your own SOPs, manuals, checklists, and then fly under a basic pilot certificate. We do have an episode where we talk about safety assurance declaration and custom drones. That would be good if you wanted to modify it to the point where you could fly it in advanced operations. There's quite a bit of detail involved in getting that safety assurance declaration. Advertised events, these are all like, there's the third category basically of drone operations is special flight operations. And it doesn't matter if you have a basic or an advanced. These are beyond the rules of CARS 901, which is the normal drone rules. The 903 stuff is all special flight operations or an SFOC, special flight operations certificate. There is kind of an expectation you're going to have an advanced because there's a lot of overlap with advanced environment, but they're going to be either flying over 400 feet in uncontrolled airspace, flying over 25 kilograms, external load operations, beyond line of sight operations, advertised events. So any event that is available to the public where there's an open air gathering of people, you need to be at least 100 feet or 30 meters away from the perimeter of that event, or else you're considered part of that event.
Mm-hmm. The only SFOC where it's more for basic pilots would be if you're a foreign operator. So if you are in Canada and you don't hold permanent residency status or Canadian citizenship, then Transport Canada considers you a foreign operator, and you need to apply for a foreign operator special flight operations certificate. There's a form you fill out, you send it to Transport Canada. They send you back what's called a compliance matrix, where they're going to ask you just for all of your documentation, all of your SOPs, so your checklists, your site survey checklists, all of that, and proof that you're able to hold, that you have the knowledge requirement to hold the basic certificate. Basically, what that means is you pass the basic exam and get your basic certificate, but in order to fly, you also need the special flight operations certificate. The way that they prevent you from flying is they will not, if you do not hold PR or citizenship status, they will not allow you to register your drone. When you get the SFOC, the number on your SFOC will become the drone registration. In the past, there used to be, if you were coming from another country, they would expect you to hold a drone license in that other country when applying for the SFOC. They waived that requirement because most places don't have that. I'd say the lion's share of countries in the world don't have an official drone licensing thing. So they were finding that it didn't matter anyways because they made you pass the basic exam anyways. So what's the point?
It was to the same. Yeah, if you pass the basic, you're at the same standard as a Canadian citizen already. And then the other thing was, it's really awkward for, let's say you're here on a student visa, to go home to get your domestic drone license and then come back just to fly a drone for fun. Like that was a bit of a rough requirement.
I've done a number of flight reviews for people on foreign operator SFOCs, and all of them were students from countries that don't have formalized drones, and they're like university students, and they're like, this is something that I want to do going forward with my life, so I want to practice flying drones. Like, I want to
build a career
with drones, and I'm from wherever, and they don't have a drone thing. And I said, okay, well then don't put anything down on the SFOC, and they didn't really have any issues with that, because if you say that
it was officially unofficial for quite some time, and now so most recently the CARAC, or the advisory circular, came out.
Anyways, we'll tuck into SFOCs in a future video.
Thanks for joining us live on another episode of Coastal Drone Weekly. If you're finding this content useful or at least entertaining, really appreciate that like and subscribe button. Over 80% of our audience is not subscribed and hasn't hit that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far, we'll see you again next week on more drone information, news, and chat. So see ya.